Welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, Executive Vice President at Advanced Colorado, joined with a very special guest today, Representative Jarvis Caldwell, who represents a good portion of Colorado Springs. And in our House, in the Legislature, he sits on the Judiciary and Education Committees. And today, Representative Caldwell, we really want to talk about all your work on the Judiciary Committee and so many public safety issues that you faced this year.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. A big fan of Advanced Colorado and happy to be here.
Well, and you just drew so much attention this session, I think, to the issues that are on citizens' hearts. When you talk to them, when you poll them, they're really concerned that Colorado has risen to the number 2 most dangerous, or fallen really, to the number 2 most dangerous state in the nation. But you had a front row seat to how this happens, how the sausage is made or not made, so to speak. And so I guess let's talk about a few of the bills that you saw in Judiciary Committee. You can pick the one you'd like to cover first.
Well, I'm happy to just start off with the basics for those listening or maybe new to this and aren't familiar with how the legislature works. So when I got assigned to Judiciary, so I was in the JAG Corps in the Air Force for 5 years. So I wasn't a JAG attorney, I was a paralegal, but I worked on the prosecution side and also worked on the defense side as well. So I've seen it from all different angles. And so I think that played a big part in getting assigned to Judiciary Committee. But it's funny because when I got assigned to Judiciary, and I would tell people who know the legislature, I would get a lot of, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I kept getting that over and over, and I would say, "Well, what's so bad about Judiciary?" And they would say, "Well, the makeup of Judiciary and the very common sense bills," as much as I think that term is overused, very common sense bills that come through there, they get defeated in the Judiciary Committee.
Right.
And then so I could say that this session was very eye-opening, and I saw it for myself. But before that, in 2023, I was actually the communications director for the House Republicans.
Yeah.
And so I kind of made it a mission early on. I said, listen, if it's really that bad and these common sense bills that keep getting defeated in Judiciary, if it's really that bad, I'm going to make it a point to highlight it and use my experience as a communications director to highlight these things and put out videos and do media interviews to show the people of Colorado why we have such a crime problem, why we're the number 2 most dangerous state in the country, which is ridiculous. Because when you think of states that would be the most dangerous, you think of New York and California and Illinois and a bunch of these other states. But no, Colorado is the number 2. And we're in the top 3 to 5 for a lot of the really worrying ones like bank robbery or auto theft, fentanyl overdoses per capita. And so, I try to use that experience that I have in the JAG Corps and as a comms director to bring to light to the people of Colorado. And I think I was pretty successful. We got some national attention on some of these bills. One of the bills that I know Advance really I think probably were supportive of, or at least was tracking, was my no PR bonds for repeat violent offenders.
Yes.
So this was a bill that in a previous session when now Congressman Gabe Evans was here, he ran this bill with Representative Shannon Byrd, who, funny enough, is now running in the Democrat primary for that congressional seat. So they ran that bill together in the past. And it failed in House Judiciary. So I decided to bring it back with Representative Shannon Byrd, and Senator Byron Pelton was on it, and Senator Dylan Roberts, the Democrat in the Senate. So it was bipartisan across the board, and I think it would have passed the House easily, and it would have passed the Senate easily, but unfortunately it couldn't make it out of House Judiciary, which your listeners will see is the constant problem and the common denominator. But what that bill said basically is, it targeted violent criminals, which we have a violent crime problem in Colorado.
Yes.
But if you'd been convicted of a violent crime in the last 2 years, or you're pending 2 or more violent crime charges, you couldn't get a PR bond. And for those who don't know, personal recognizance bond, it's basically cashless bail, and you sign a piece of paper and you walk out and you're free until your court date without having to put up any leverage or money or whatever you want to call it. And we had set it at $7,500 bail if you fall within that requirement.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I kept hearing from the Democrats on House Judiciary is that they had a problem with that because it's unfair to poor people, is the argument they kept making. Right, okay. Which what's interesting is I didn't hear that argument when the attacker in Boulder, who attacked the Jewish group, when he attempted to murder a bunch of Jewish citizens. they gave him a $10 million bail that he couldn't afford, and that was, I think, intentional
Right, they
to
were
keep
okay
him
with that, yeah.
to keep him off the street. I didn't hear any of them coming out and saying that that's unfair. So bail does serve a purpose, and so we thought $7,500 was reasonable. Now, because we kept hearing from the Democrats in that committee that having a $7,500 bail is unfair to poor people, we offered an amendment that was accepted that said, okay, we'll strike the $7,500 and just leave it completely up to the judge to decide what the bail is. So it could literally be a $1 bail.
Right.
$1 bail,
Yeah.
and they still defeated it. And I think the most surprising thing was that even the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Javier Mabry, he's a Denver Democrat, he argued against any bail at all. And that was after Yara Zokai and Lorena Garcia and some other Democrats on the committee voiced their opinion about having a problem with any bail at all. So if Coloradans really want to understand where we're at in the House Judiciary Committee, virtually every member, including Representative Espinoza, who's a former federal immigration judge and new in the legislature, she voiced her opinion against bail, any kind of cash bail. So virtually the entire House Judiciary Committee on the Democrat side does not believe in bail at all.
Well, that's extremely concerning, especially because, to emphasize, your bill was dealing with violent criminals, not necessarily, people who sped. And I don't know, maybe some other low-level theft crime or something, which we should take more seriously than we do in Colorado. But you were talking about violent, hurting people, getting them off the streets.
I always like to take this to the extreme and say, okay, well, what if it was murder? What if someone murdered your family? Would you believe they should just be walking free until their court date, which may be a year from now? Take it to the extreme in these situations. And I think when you personalize it like that, I don't think they necessarily feel so strongly about cashless bail. But I know if it's first degree murder, there's not a bail anyways, but whatever, second degree murder, attempted murder, you can just fill in the blank. But if that's the case, do you really want them walking around until their court date, which may be a year from now? And I don't think they would feel that way. But with this, it's that was their position on it.
Well,
So
and I find it interesting that it's not like they're offering amendments to make your bill what they would consider better. Oh, let's just limit it to second degree murder, because even that would be, a step above what we do in Colorado right now. But they just want to throw it out and then make their excuses.
Yeah, it's always funny because when I sit in these committees and I hear these like little complaints about the bill, and then you say, okay, well, offer up the amendment, right? Like offer up the amendment. If you say you can't get to a yes because X, Y, and Z, as a bill sponsor, if I'm willing to accept it, okay, let's do it. And frankly, the committees, they could offer the amendment and accept it without my permission,
yes,
right?
They could. Yes, they could.
And they could still pass it. And now I have a vote on judiciary, so I could be a no, but if they really like the bill and they were hung up on that one thing, they could amend it themselves in committee and then pass it. But they won't do that. But now what I've found is if it's a friend of theirs or something, or they agree with the overall general concept, then they'll pass it and say, well, hopefully we can work on this before it gets to the floor. But if it's your bill, and especially if it's a tough on crime bill in House Judiciary, then they're not as willing to work on it to pass it.
Wow. And this may be something you can't comment on, so it can just be my observation if you can't. But I find it interesting that the Speaker of the House would, I think, consider herself a moderate Democrat, moderate on business issues, and at least I think that's how she would present herself. But she, to my knowledge, gets to appoint people on the committees. And so I find it very interesting that leadership wants to present themselves as moderate and yet takes the one committee that deals with all the public safety, the crime issues in Colorado, and appoints some of the most far left, pro-criminal, anti-bail, honestly, Denver socialists, Democrats on this particular committee.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to comment on that because it's something I bring up a lot. Is, ultimately the Speaker of the House appoints those committee members. And I think there's politics there. And I think what it is the Speaker gets elected by the Legislature. And so the Speaker has to wheel and deal behind the scenes before each General Assembly starts. And has to make certain promises to shore up certain votes, just like we see, at the U.S. federal level. And so there's a lot of talking behind the scenes about how can I secure your vote. And I think with a lot of the very progressive, like you said, socialists, and you know, sometimes when we call them socialists on the House floor, we get gavelled down. But there are members that sit on the House Judiciary Committee that are literally a part of the
Yes,
Democrat
they
Socialists
identify
of
themselves
America.
that way. Yes.
So they identify that way. So I have no problem calling them that. But yeah, I think that's how you get these like really far left people on Judiciary Committee, because it is promises that get made behind the scenes in order to secure votes to become the speaker or become whatever position that they're running for. So
Unfortunately, makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens in next session, but I'd probably expect something similar
Right.
makeup, and you'd know better than I would.
Yeah.
But so I want to talk about at least one or more of the bills that you saw in judiciary, and we can also circle back to this. But as you brought up your communications background, and I really want to hit on 1312 with
Yeah.
you, which is a bill that you drew national attention to that here in Colorado and helped take out some of the most egregious provisions in that bill. So let's get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But one that you had go through Judiciary Committee, the child rape bill. The reason I want to talk about that, at Advance Colorado, we are proposing a ballot measure that would take that, parts of that bill, and then also parts of child solicitation here in Colorado. Both crimes are just treated, horribly in Colorado. And what I mean by that is, as you know better than I do, the offenders are barely punished at all.
Right.
Probation eligible.
Yeah.
I think the average person on the street would think you hurt a kid, you go to jail.
Right.
But that's not at all what happens in Colorado. So can you fill us in on the situation and then how that bill kind of went through?
Yeah, absolutely. So in House Judiciary, which is where we saw this bill, that it was a Brandy Bradley bill, Representative Republican from Douglas County. So when that bill came through, there was a lot of things that I had no idea about, which was, so in Colorado, 70% of people who are convicted of child rape, 70% only get probation, which is mind-blowing. I didn't think I heard it
crazy.
correctly when I first heard it.
Yeah.
And that's because depending on what the offense is, it is a felony 5 offense, which is a probation eligible offense. And a lot of these, what I would call soft on crime judges, give them that probation, which is insane. And when I talk to the DAs and I go, guys, what's going on here? They go, look, we ask for more time, but a lot of the judges only give probation for these. And I think one of the scarier statistics is you can get probation the way the law is currently written. If you rape 10 children, as long as each of those children are only raped one time each, you still qualify for a felony 5 charge, which is probation eligible. But it's more severe if you rape one child 2 times than 10 children one time each. And so we wanted to change that. It's absolutely insane. And so with Brandy Bradley's bill, it was going to make mandatory prison, increase the penalties essentially. And again, that bill was defeated in House Judiciary. And if I'm not mistaken, I think maybe all but one Democrat voted against it. Maybe one did vote in favor of it. And Chad Clifford, I can't remember if he swapped, if he voted in favor of that one or not.
And was there a Democrat co-sponsor on that bill? Or am I thinking of a different
There
one?
was, and I believe for that bill, that was Representative Regina English from
that's what I
Colorado
was thinking of.
Springs.
Okay.
Yep, so it was bipartisan in that sense. And I'm not sure about on the Senate side. I believe the new Senator Republican Senator Carson,
yes.
I believe he was the sponsor in the Senate. I don't know if they had a Democrat yet, but I think that bill would have passed with flying colors on the House floor if it could just get out of Judiciary Committee.
Well, and I
which
think
it
that's
can't.
what's interesting that you're pointing out that a lot of our listeners would find interesting, Representative Caldwell, is that these are not issues that really are partisan. These are not issues where, the state would be split 50-50 on it and people, aren't sure what their elected representatives would do. These are issues of public safety, of crime that deal with children and some of the most violent criminals that your average person on the street, no matter what party they belong to, would say, yeah, we better fix that law. I had no idea Colorado's law was so bad.
Exactly.
But it is this one committee that you sit on that's tying all these things up.
And if I could just add to that, I make this
Please.
point all the time in my closing arguments. I always say, if this was a ballot measure, this would overwhelmingly pass.
Absolutely.
I say that all the time because I am trying to get across to people and the committee, frankly, that the way you guys are voting right now on these issues is not reflective of the state of Colorado.
No.
Now, I know we all represent districts, but we're making state laws that affect the entire state of Colorado.
Exactly.
And so you need to take that in consideration as well. And if this were a ballot measure, I think it would be an 85% vote, if not more. Because when people find out that you get probation for raping a child, very few people I can think of
Are okay
think
with
that's okay.
No.
Very few.
Well, we did see an example of exactly what you're talking about in 2024 when
Right.
Advanced Colorado, we ran the ballot measure on truth in sentencing for violent criminals. And that had been run through the legislature. Representative Gabe Evans, now congressman, had run that, I believe, also with Representative Byrd.
Yeah.
And they had almost got it through committee one time,
Right.
I know, but it just could never get through the legislature, but
Yeah.
was the most popular citizen-initiated ballot measure last year.
Right.
So I think you're absolutely right
Yeah.
that these things, people want them in the legislatures, on the committee in particular,
Right.
aren't matching up.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is the way the committee's made up, it's 7-4. So it's 4 Republicans, 7 Democrats. So in order to get a bill passed or get a bill killed, you need as a Republican, you need to flip 2 Democrats. And it's always kind of the same 2 Democrats. It's Representative Espinoza, who Espinoza unseated Tim Hernandez in the primary, right? And then Representative Chad Clifford.
Yes.
And so those are kind of our 2 that sometimes we can get them on board. And there's a good example of a good bill that we did pass, which was the felony theft of firearms. So that was Majority Leader Monica Duran and Representative Ryan Armagost, Republican.
Yes.
And so we got that through, but we got it through because 4 Republicans supported it in House Judiciary, and we were able to flip 2 Democrats on House Judiciary, which was Espinoza and Clifford. So it passed with 4 Republicans, 2 Democrats to get out of House Judiciary. And then it didn't have a problem after that. And then it passed and the governor signed it. But basically what that bill said was that the old law now was that it only counted as a felony if you steal a firearm if the value of it was $2,000 or more.
Okay.
Which, first off, I own a lot of firearms.
Yeah.
I maybe own one that's over $2,000, maybe 2 over 2,000.
Yeah.
And it kind of just doesn't make sense, right? Because
No, arbitrary
whether it's a $300 pistol or a $2,000 pistol, you know, it's still, if you use it in a crime and you hurt somebody with it and it's it's stolen
effects.
in general, it's the same effect. So why does it matter what the value is? And so we were able to get this bill passed, and what that did is said, doesn't matter the value of the firearm, it's a felony. And I think that's really good because we do have a problem with stolen firearms here in Colorado, especially in Colorado Springs. A lot of stolen cars, which auto theft is a big issue as well.
Indeed.
Stolen cars, they get rammed through these gun stores, and a lot of times it's teenagers. They run in there, they steal a whole bunch of firearms, and then they sell them on the black market.
Wow.
And you know, if you steal a Glock or something like that, which is very commonly used on the street, they're only like $600 firearms, and that's only a misdemeanor under the old law. But now with this new bill, it's now a felony, which makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I actually hadn't dived into the details of that one,
Yeah.
so I'm glad you explained it.
Yeah.
And good that it got through. I mean, hopefully more can happen like that in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, we did it with auto theft a couple years ago in 2023. I think that was a Matt Soper bill.
Yeah.
And because there was a value on stealing your car, and that made it a
Right.
felony.
I remember
But
that.
again, the argument was, well, you know, what if you're a single mom and that you have $1,000 car and
Yes.
that's what you rely on to get your kids to school, to get to work, whatever the situation may be, go to doctor's appointments. Does it matter whether it's a $1,000 car or a $10,000 car? That it
Right.
still
Not
serves
to
the
you.
same purpose.
Exactly.
And you know, and I'd like to think that the reason we went from, I think we were number 1 in auto
Yes, we
theft
were.
to number 2. I want to say I saw reported we were number 4 in auto
I've
theft.
seen it too. You're right.
Yeah, and so you know, I like to think that maybe having stricter penalties is a cause of that.
Oh, yeah.
Because that passed in 23, and so far we've you know, improved at least on the national level.
Yes.
Our number, it's still a major problem though. But you know, I'm hoping maybe that happens with the firearm.
Absolutely.
theft.
Well, any reduction is a reduction, and it's
Right.
moving us in the right direction to go
Right.
down in crime instead of
Yeah.
up. So
Yeah,
we'll take it.
Yeah, stricter penalties. It's weird sometimes. Sometimes just having the stricter penalties. You know, I hear on judiciary people say, "Well, nobody's pulling up the law and looking. Oh, if I commit this crime, then I get this amount of time, stuff like that." And it's like, no, yeah, people do that.
Oh, yeah.
I promise
Organized
you.
crime.
Right.
Yes.
I promise you. You talk to people who commit crimes. They know what the penalties are for certain, which is why they know if a juvenile will only get a slap on the wrist for committing a crime. Gangs and cartels recruit juveniles to commit these crimes. They know what the penalties are. And not only that, if you do have stricter penalties, then those people committing the crimes, because recidivism rates are so high, they're in jail or in prison and they're not out committing those crimes. So your crime statistics are going to go down because the people committing the crimes are in jail and not out on the street.
No, that
right?
makes
It's kind of
sense.
obvious.
Yes.
You mentioned 1312
Yeah,
though.
let's
I would
move
love to
that.
talk about
Yeah,
1312.
I mean, and I think for
Yeah.
anyone, I think a lot of people got to know you this session through 1312,
Yeah.
and I know you're on national news about it. But if you could tell some of the story of
Yeah.
how
I
you
would love to give you the background
created
on
the
it.
attention on that,
Yeah.
which was so vital.
Absolutely. So with 1312, that's a lot of people just refer to as like the transgender bill. It had to do with custody and taking away children from parents in custody dispute situations when the parent doesn't affirm the gender identity confusion of the child, right?
Yeah.
I think by now the whole country's familiar with it, which is good that it got that kind of attention. But kind of the background on that was this, because it kind of an indicator, it was a late bill. The bill number is 1312. So when you get into the 1300 numbers, those are bills that are coming towards the end of session because the very first bill is 1001.
Yes.
So when you get to 1312, that's the 300th something bill in the House. And so on a Monday, late in the session, at the end of the day, when we do announcements, right? And so you'll have your committee chairs walk up and they'll say, "Hey, Judiciary Committee, we're meeting in 15 minutes in this room," like literally announcements. So I think I was over talking to some staff members, and Javier Mabry, the chairman of Judiciary Committee, went up to the well and said, "Oh, by the way, Judiciary, tomorrow in committee, we added a bill, House Bill 1312. So just put it on your radar. Thanks." And I remember him saying that, and I listened kind of, peripheral. I just kind of listened for a second. I went, 1312, I don't remember that bill. Okay, so I went and looked it up that evening, and when I read it, I was like, holy cow, this is a radical bill. Because that's one part of it. There was a whole part about affecting businesses and what is
Yes.
considered, discrimination. There were things about school dress code policies. There was a lot there. Name changes was a part of that as well. And so I couldn't believe it. And so I tried to blow the whistle. Erin Lee with a parent advocacy group, she was great for blowing the whistle on that. But we started trying to get it out there, and it took a little bit of time. It started getting some attention. We had less than 24 hours to get people signed up. And thanks to just members around Colorado, like Aaron, we were able to get somewhere around over 100, I think around 110 against people to testify against it. So we hear it, they realize how many people signed up, so they limit the committee, as they always do with
Yes, they do.
controversial bills. They limit the committee, and what we found out during this testimony was some of the people testifying in favor of the bill, a lot of the activist groups, they were saying, "Oh yeah, we worked on this bill for over a year." And
Oh,
so
my
I was
goodness.
like, so
Wow.
when we got to the closing statements, they always make the Republicans go first because they're in control. So they like to respond to things we say, and then we don't have a chance to respond.
Exactly.
So they make us go first. And so one of the points I made, I said, I heard from witnesses and stakeholders that worked on this bill that they worked on it for over a year. And I said, I found out about this bill less than 24 hours ago. So that's kind of concerning. And then along that same line, I said, did you talk with the business community? Because this is going to affect businesses on the discrimination, the anti-discrimination side. I said, did you talk with schools? Because you're talking about changing dress code policies.
Exactly.
You're talking about name changes. And then lastly, I said, did you talk about parental rights groups? Because you're talking about taking children away for
Literally.
dead naming their child. And as I kept making the argument, I named my children, and you're gonna say I can't call them by the name that I gave them, or I could lose custody of them, And so I brought that up, and then a few minutes later, Representative Yara Zokai, who is a Democrat Socialist of America member from Denver, very, very far left, she, I think, in response to what I was saying about, did you consult with advocacy groups? She made the comment that we don't have to consult with hate groups. And she said we wouldn't ask the KKK for their opinion on civil rights legislation. And at the time I heard it, and I just remember kind of shaking my head and going, okay. And I was like, that was weird. Well, that night, I actually slept in my office that night because we went to like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was laying on my couch in my office, and I just kept thinking about it, and I was like, she was replying to me. I was like, she had to have been replying to what I said.
Yeah.
And so what I did was the next morning, I went back, I re-listened to the audio of the closing statements to make sure that what she was saying was directly in response to me, even though it was a few minutes later, because I think there was a Republican that went after me. And so I was the only one that talked about consulting with stakeholder groups. And so it was without a doubt, she was responding to me. So what I did was I had our comms team clip me saying, parental rights groups, and then a clip of her saying, we don't consult with hate groups. And I put it out there online. And I think from there, it really started catching attention that we have legislators calling parental rights groups hate groups. And then from there, we started getting a lot of media inquiries. And then from there, it kind of snowballed, and Fox News picked it up. And I mean, somebody even sent me a clip from Sky News in Australia. Sky News in Australia covered it. So when I would talk to people, I would say, this is literally an international story at this point, because we have foreign countries and their media covering this. And from there, it got a lot of attention. The Democrats rushed it through the House on a Sunday of all days, which I don't think was by accident. They made us come in on a Sunday, and they used Rule 14 to limit the second reading debate. I think that was actually done on Friday. They used Rule 14, they limited us to 2 hours, brought us in on Sunday, then used Rule 16 on third readings, which is where we vote. And Rule 16 is essentially calling the question. And so it completely cuts off debate. And they used it right at the beginning, so there was no closing statements from us before we voted. And that caught national attention as well, because we put a clip of them doing that. And it went about a month before it actually went to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I think because they were freaking out. I think they realized how much attention it got, how bad they looked doing it. And what happened in the Senate was they stripped a lot of that, the more controversial stuff out, but it's still a bad bill. But, in the minority, you have to define your wins. We never had the numbers to stop it. But we put so much pressure on them thanks to the people showing up. In the Senate, they had 700 people sign up to testify on that bill, and they only got to a few hundred. So a lot of people who showed up, but we had a rally there. We had pastors and people flying from all over the country to be there to take part in that rally and to sign up to testify. And because I think everybody looked at this as like, we're on the front lines. Colorado's the front lines. If this passes here and gets signed into law, it may spread across the country about taking your kids away for misgendering them. And so, you have to define your wins in a minority. And even though 1312 still passed, it still got signed into law. I don't think it was a defeat for us in that it looks a lot different. The signed version looks a lot different than what the original version looks like. Still a bad bill.
Sure. But I actually agree with you, because this was one of the bills that Advance Colorado did engage on. It's not necessarily one of our focus issues, but we focus on education, and anything that relates to parental rights relates to education. If you don't have a right to raise your child, you don't have the right to educate them. And so this is one we did get engaged in, specifically highlighting the portion you're talking about that did get taken out, which was, the parents could lose custody of their children for not basically buying into the gender ideology of the state. And I think, it was just essential that you got national and international attention on it, because you're right. I think, whatever they're allowed to do in darkness with the less attention, they'll push it through and get it through and think they have the votes. But if the eyes of the nation are on a specific, extremely egregious portion of a bill that threatens parental rights, a lot of parents will show up and speak out. So I think you're right. When you're in the minority, you can't win everything, but you can win some things. You can make bad things less bad and keep some rights for parents in Colorado, and that's just essential. So thanks for sharing the background story.
I will add, it's bad when there were a lot of very left-wing activist groups who were in support of the bill and actually came and testified in favor of it when it originally got introduced in the House Judiciary Committee. And it got so much negative attention nationally that they actually took amend positions on it.
Oh, wow. In the Senate.
Which is very interesting, because they showed up and testified in favor of it originally in the original version. And then it had so much backlash, they took an amend position for at least for a time being, because I think even within their own organizations, they were getting blowback saying, guys, we're for, transgender rights and things like that, but you're taking it too far to the point where we're getting backlash. And I don't know if donors threatened to pull money from their organizations or what
Sure.
happened behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But it's pretty bad when they changed their position on it, when
For
they
sure.
probably wrote the bill.
Well,
in
and
all reality.
legal language, and I think some of the legal language in the bill was problematic. And I heard some of their groups saying, we're not even really sure what this would do.
Right.
Maybe we should research a little further.
Right.
I think they weren't referring to the custody portion. They were referring to some of the changes to the
crossing
anti-discrimination law.
state lines, that was,
that
I think it
too.
was section
Yep.
3, and it talked about bringing a child from out of state into Colorado and then not following court orders from out of state if, ordering them to bring the child back or whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
I brought that up in committee, the original committee, and I brought it up on the House floor, and it got shot down. It was just dismissed, and we were told by the bill sponsors, oh, this is totally legal. Well, ironically, or coincidentally, when it went to the Senate, they struck Section 3 out of the bill, and they said, we have serious legal concerns about this. We don't, because the full faith and credit clause in the Constitution, that states will honor other states' court rulings.
Exactly.
Right? It's what kind of makes us a union in a sense. And so, the Senate stripped it out on legal grounds, and I said, that how embarrassing for the House is it that the Senate is doing our job for us, because we should have caught this, we should have stripped it out ourselves, and now we had to rely on the Senate to do it.
Yes, I mean, at least they must have listened to your argument and thought it was right. But one last thing I want to talk to you about, Representative Caldwell, and I think you probably have a million stories that our listeners would love to listen to, so we'll have to have you back. But it was a controversial bill that I think passed, but the governor vetoed, on the social media bill. I'm less familiar with it, just to be perfectly honest with you. But I know you have some expertise in this issue, and because I've heard at least that the social media bill that involves minors and their activity on social media, there's a lot of people that are concerned about it, and that it may come back in some form next session. So if you could just enlighten us a little bit on that, that'd be great.
So Senate Bill 86, it passed the House and Senate. The governor vetoed it, which he kind of said early on that he would. The social media companies were very much against it, which I keep telling my colleagues and other people, when did the social media companies become our friends? These are the same people who've been silencing conservatives forever, whether it's the lab leak theory or it's COVID, whatever the situation. They have not been our friends for a long time, and they were very much against this bill, which I took as a sign that maybe there were things about it that I liked. But really, to sum it up, I think DA Michael Allen from the 4th Judicial District down in El Paso County really summed it up, which is social media is the new place of crime in today's world, right? So if you wanted to buy drugs or buy an illegal weapon or something back when I was a kid, you would have to, go to a certain part of town, which was a high crime area, and then you could buy drugs, find drugs, or you had to know somebody. Today, children are just going on social media, and Snapchat seems like is a big one because how it automatically deletes the messages. I don't have Snapchat, but that's how I understand it. And so drug dealers are going on Snapchat, and I don't know if it's certain hashtags they're using. I'm not intimately familiar with how it works, but apparently it is very easy to go on these social media platforms and find people selling drugs, and they will meet you in your local area and sell drugs. And that's what's happening right now. And they're doing that with guns as well. Human trafficking is happening on social media. And so the problem that we run into is we have a lot of times parents who their kids are buying fentanyl. They may think it's something else, Valium or Percocet. They buy drugs off social media. It turns out to be fentanyl. They die from it. The parents get the phone, or the police get the phone, or DAs get the phone, whoever. And what they do is they subpoena these social media companies, and they say, hey, this account sold drugs to someone who died. We are investigating it. We need this information. And what we keep finding is that the social media companies are they're either taking way too long to reply, or they're not replying at all. And so I've heard so many cases where these social media companies, I mean, think about it. TikTok, it's a Chinese company. The CEO probably lives in China, I assume. He gets a subpoena. His company gets a subpoena from a local DA in Colorado. Nothing happens to him if they don't reply to it.
No.
So what our DAs keep telling us, and all 23 DAs, Democrats and Republicans, supported this bill. All 23 DAs said that this is a problem, and that they will subpoena these social media companies, and the social media companies either take 4 or 5 months to respond, or they don't respond at all. Or if they do respond, they'll say we needed more information, and then it's another 4 or 5 months. Well, by then, that account's no longer being used,
Yeah.
and they've moved on. So time is really of the essence when you do this.
Makes sense.
And so what that bill required social media companies do was to respond within 72 hours. We send you a subpoena for the account information on this, and you have 72 hours to reply. If not, there's going to be some kind of financial penalty. And that would force them to do it. Now think about if you're a brick and mortar store. Think about you own a brick and mortar store and somebody was selling drugs outside of your store, right? And the DA or the police, whoever, show up and they give you a subpoena and they say, here's a subpoena for your, or a warrant for your cameras because somebody was outside of your store selling drugs, right? You would have to comply with that as a brick and mortar store and as a business owner. You would have to turn over your video footage because you were ordered to, right? But that doesn't apply to social media companies right now. And so the crux of this bill was making them comply with these subpoenas and requests. And that was one aspect to it. Another aspect was just reporting data. So this got flipped into a big thing where it was turned into as if the government was getting your individual data.
Right.
But really, that's not what this was. This was an aggregate, and this was to say, X amount of minors using social media. There's 100,000 minors using social media in Colorado. We have 500 subpoenas issued because 300 kids died from fentanyl or whatever the case is.
Okay.
It was literally just tracking data, just like we track car theft and firearm theft and everything else. And I think I think people misunderstood it, or to give credit where it's due, because a lot of Republicans voted against it as well. There were concerns about, like, a part of the bill said within 24 hours, you have to take that account down. Now, the thinking behind this is, if you are a drug dealer on Snapchat and you sell a lethal dose of fentanyl to a kid, to a child, we don't want that account to still be up and still selling drugs. And so if the sheriff's department or DA or somebody reports that account and says, this account sold drugs to a kid, that kid died, you need to take this account down immediately. They had 24 hours to comply with that. I can understand there was concern that this may be abused and that social media companies, because they're very risk adverse, they may just rubber stamp these requests. And so now all of a sudden you get a bunch of people reporting an account and say, this account's selling drugs or selling guns. All of a sudden those social media companies, instead of taking the time to actually determine if that's the case, they'll just rubber stamp it and then ban the account. And then there's no appeal. So what I recommended to the bill sponsors, because we didn't override the veto in the House, the Senate did, but we didn't in the House. I said, listen, you need to remove that part, because a lot of people are concerned with that. There's a lot of concern on the illegal gun piece. The bill was very clear that this had to do with illegal guns, like stolen firearms or whatever falls under state or federal law that makes the gun illegal. There was a lot of concern from the gun community, and I get it, because we are kind of the most persecuted on social media. A lot of videos that we post with guns and we're not doing anything wrong, they get taken down, they get flagged and taken down. So I can understand that. So I told the bill sponsors, look, I recommend that maybe taking the portion of the gun piece out of it, because I can see where it can be abused. Then removing the accounts within 24 hours without an appeal process at a minimum. Because people don't want to be permanently banned for something they didn't do just because they were wrongly reported, and then social media companies rubber stamped it. So I do think it comes back. I think it's going to be way more narrow. And my recommendation is to focus on the subpoena piece, because social media companies need to be held accountable.
Agreed.
If this happens, and the longer that you let someone selling fentanyl or something on your platform, the more kids are going to die from it.
No, I mean, that sounds like at its core, especially that core piece for the DAs, sounds like something we need in Colorado, and honestly, probably all states need it. But I think hopefully the discussion now created around it, since it passed, got vetoed, didn't quite get overridden, but it's going to come back. Maybe more people will also understand the data reporting piece that you talked about, because while I didn't deeply look into this bill, I had heard what you mentioned, that people thought it was like the private reporting of their kids' social media accounts, and we're a little concerned about that. But if that's not true, it is just aggregate reporting of total crimes on social media. That would actually be really useful information. So hopefully it can come back in a little bit better form as you've recommended, and then help DAs catch criminals.
For sure.
who again are targeting kids. So many crimes in Colorado seem to target kids, and we need to fix that.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Representative Caldwell. You've been listening to another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, and joined today by Representative Jarvis Caldwell, who I'm sure will be back with plenty more stories for you. Tune in next time.